Hey, what's up, parents, teachers, therapists, coaches, anybody who's interested in supporting kids with executive function challenges? My name's Seth Perler here with William, Bill Stixrud, and Ned Johnson. I've known these guys for a while, and they've got a new book out. And I don't often do this, but I'm doing this today because I love their two books so far, and this is their third one. And I was just telling them before how much I love the second one in particular. And we'll get into a little bit about why and so on. So if you guys want to say hello, what's up, Bill? How you doing, Ned?
Terrific.
Oh, great.
It's great to see you again.
You too. You too. Thank you. So, the new book is called The Seven Principles for Raising a Self-Driven Child, a workbook. There we go. That's it right there. So, for the parent watching right now, I was, we were discussing earlier sort of where the families that I work with are at currently, and we're at the beginning of April here, and it's the end of the school year. And for parents with kids with executive function challenges, a lot of the kids are struggling with a lack of motivation just because they have executive function challenges and may not be motivated. B, being behind in classes. This is the pattern. And now it's the end of the school year. So this is the time when they're trying to get caught up and maybe resisting getting caught up. And they're struggling with a bunch of classes, a bunch of late work, missing work, incomplete, zeros, homework battles, this, that, and the other. But we also have spring fever. Kids are going to be checked out. Teachers are checked out. Everybody's ready for a break, and school's not over. Stuff still needs to be done. So, in terms of the book, The Seven Principles for Raising a Self-Driven Child, um, and sort of the situation a lot of families are finding themselves in right now, I want to ask a little bit about um, how is executive function related to this term self-driven child, and why do you choose that? And
So, Ned and I started working together about 15 years ago, and the two problems that we saw kids struggling with were number one, we had this epidemic of mental health problems, but also we saw so many kids who struggled to motivate themselves in a healthy way. And after doing a lot of research on these problems, we realized they're both rooted in a low sense of control. Because we know the most stressful thing in the universe is experience, something's happening and I don't know what to do. Feeling helpless or hopeless or completely overwhelmed. And also, every place we looked to try to understand how do kids become self-motivated, it all pointed in the direction of autonomy. They need to have a sense that this is my life, and I'm going to get out of what I put into it. And so we know that that a sense our goal is to help kids develop a sense of control, so they will motivate themselves, develop themselves, so they'll be able to run their own life before they leave home. And so certainly, kids with executive functioning problems and ADHD, where their prefrontal cortex is less mature physically, and so those executive functions delay, it's more challenging. But the same principle holds, which is that we have a basic biological and psychological need for a sense of control, and including kids with executive functioning difficulties. And if we try to force, we try to go against that and force, it never leads where we want to. And Ned and I both raised kids with ADHD using these principles, who are doing really well. And we know that it works because it's such a basic biological human need to feel that this is my life. I'm not being constantly being forced to do stuff against my will. So it's more challenging in some ways with kids with executive functioning problems, but it's still a noble goal because having a healthy sense of control is good for everything.
And
and
and the
how,
part that makes it hard, of course, is that parents who feel it's their job to get their kid, across the goal line to make sure they don't flounder and flail, and fail in school. And a low sense of control is stressful to them as well. So when kids are struggling, parents almost immediately try to exert more control over kids to try to right the ship, right? And because they worry about their kids, and that makes a ton of sense. But it's often not intuitive that a parental need or drive to exert more control is actually working against the very outcomes that they hope for their kids.
so when parents feel this deep anxiety, like I've got to rescue, or I've got to get in there, I've got to do something. And it's so ingrained, and they've been practicing that from, they start having their kid as this infant, and now their kid is 13 or 16 or something, and this infant is growing up, but they're seeing that their child is struggling with something, and from whatever they've learned from their parents or their schooling or society, our habits, our patterns are so deep within us. So when a parent, it like says, okay, I know what I'm doing isn't working, I want to do things differently, but there's such a drive to, like, I can't just bite my tongue at certain times, or I guess before we get into some of the strategies, before we're even getting there, the parent has to be able to grasp, okay, I can do this, I will be able to do that. So how do you respond to that sort of a concern that a parent might have, if I articulated that well enough?
No, part of what we're trying to do in our work, Seth, is to help parents feel that it's safe and it's right to trust their kids more and worry about them less. And it does mean that we have to at times sit on our hands and bite our lip. But that's the only way that the kids can have the experiences they need to develop a brain that copes well with challenges, that's self-directed, that's not overly stressed and anxious all the time. It's just, part of what we're trying to do is help them understand. Our first two books talked a lot of science. There's a lot of science to say this is why this is so crucial for human beings in general. And in our new book, we have these. It's about these 7 principles that we've extracted from our 2 books that kind of boil this down to make it easier, and exercises to help work through the various blocks, to help work through the fear that we have. What if I don't do this? What if I let him fail? That kind of thing. So I think the first thing is understanding, getting clear that it's right for me, not to worry all the time, not to jump in and rescue all the time, and then how do I deal with my own emotions? How to deal with my own frustration, my own anxiety, like that.
And okay, so that's the segue. So how do they deal with their own anxiety? And I don't want to complicate things too much, but I just had a conversation again the other day that I've had a billion times before, where the parents, like, what if the 2 parents aren't on the same page?
Yeah.
So how does the parent deal with that sense of anxiety in themselves? How do we start? We can just scratch the surface a little bit here, and then what if the one of the parents isn't on the same page or approaches things completely differently?
Okay.
Well, when parents are on the same page, I mean, one of the foundational things we want to remind ourselves is the only person we can control is us. I can't control my spouse. I can't control my kid. A lot of people think that they can. They can make it so unpleasant with their child, especially, that their kid eventually gives in. But you can't make people do things against their will. You can break their will, and then they finally give in. But then you can't make them do things against their will. And when you, at first, it's a really scary prospect. But when you can make peace with that, then it really changes the energy, because then I don't feel responsible. I can't be responsible for something that I actually can't control. And so much of the work we do is trying to change the energy, in part because, if we go back to executive functions you talked about, stress completely foobars executive functions, right?
Mm-hmm.
So your kid or your spouse's problem solving abilities will go out the window the more you try to control them. Their cognitive and emotional flexibility of, like, what's another way to go about this, or how can I think about this differently or reframe it, goes out the window. And so, it's hard. I mean, obviously, it's much better for a child if mom and dad are on the same page, but kids don't need they don't need mom and dad to be on the same page in order to feel supported, and in order to feel safe within their skin. Nice, but not necessary. Because if I as a spouse feel like, this is a disaster until my spouse comes around and sees it the way that I do, oh, I've just created another source of stress because I'm now focused on one more thing that I can't control.
Yeah, yeah. And it's so much our approach. There's a chapter in our book called "Motivating Kids Without Trying to Change Them," where we ask parents to not try to. You can't change somebody against their will, as Ned said, but we can be really clear about what we think is right for us to do, and what's not right for us to do, and be really focused on that. And it doesn't mean we can't control our spouse either. And your question is really a good one because we're all the time, mothers tend to find it easier in many ways to buy our approach of thinking about yourself as a consultant to your kid, whose job it is to help your kids ultimately figure out how to run their own life before they leave home, than fathers do. Fathers tend to be a little bit more, on average in our experience, a little bit more command and control. But the mother is clear that I can't do this. I don't think this is right. I can't do this. That it's okay. It's okay. It's okay for kids to have parents, as Ned said. We're on the same page. It's a little uncomfortable. And you have to kind of talk to them
Yeah.
about it sometimes and say, we both love you, even though we see it a little differently. But it's not the end of the world.
And when we were talking in the pre-interview, we were talking about today breaking this into 3 sections. And so parents out there, we're trying to be of service in terms of giving you some practical things that you can implement today. And where do we take this conversation and sort of the structure for parents? How can they, I guess, so, and for everybody watching who knows me, my brain is completely melted today. I've just been traveling and everything. So hello, my audience. And but how do we sort of tell them where we're headed here today and then shift gears?
Well, there's 7 principles in the book, and we're not going to go through all of them. But the 3 that we're going to try to talk about today are the idea of parents being a consultant rather than the boss or the manager or the police. The second one is about an accurate model of reality, both what we try to convey to our kids and also to remind ourselves of that. And the third is about motivating kids without trying to change them, the thing that Bill just mentioned. And this is, I mean, all these are really important because as you noted, at the end of the year when your kids are behind and they're up to their ears and things, and you're looking at like how is this possibly going to get done, and they're looking at how is it possibly going to get done. The stress is high. The stress is high, and these are 3 principles that we really think can help keep us grounded and working in ways that are, 1, effective, and 2, more aligned with the values that we all hold.
Awesome. So let's dive into this consultant one first, and then we'll start the next conversation after that. So you use the term consultant. Why did you choose the word consultant? And I know that you alluded to this, how it's different from boss or controller or manager, the words that you use. But why did you choose consultant? And can you just go a little bit deeper into those 2 roles, how you could be either consultant type approach or this other approach? And let's dive into that.
So almost 40 years ago, I'm a neuropsychologist, and I've tested kids for a living for 40 years. And I see a lot of kids with ADHD and executive functioning problems and learning disabilities and a lot of anxious kids. And I was struck very early in my career by how often parents would say, oh my God, I dread dinner time because after dinner, it's just World War III trying to get the kid to do his homework. And it just seemed, and I learned in 1986 that homework doesn't contribute to learning in elementary school. And I thought, what's all this fussing and fighting about? It seems so pointless. These are the most precious things in the universe. And you're spending all this time fighting pointlessly about this work that you don't really need to do. It seems so crazy. So I wrote an article in McCall's magazine and just said how to not fight with your kid about your homework. And I said, just tell him, I love you too much to fight with you about your homework. You're the most precious thing to me. I'm not going to argue every night about this. And I care more about you than I do about your homework. And also, I know you want to get it done, and I'm willing to be your homework consultant. I'm willing to help you in any way I can. I'm willing to sit with you when you come home and figure out what's the best way to get it done, what's the best time to do it. If you need help with anything, I'll try to help it the best I can. But I don't want to fight about it. And also, I don't want to weaken you because if I work harder than you do on this, then you're going to think that somehow I'm responsible for getting your work done rather than you. And I think that's not fair to you. And like that. So the idea is you change the energy from thinking, I'm supposed to be able to get my kid to do this. I'm supposed to be able to manage him
To
and make sure
get
he always
them
does.
to do it. Yeah.
Well, that's the thing.
To motivate them. Yeah.
Right. And that's the very powerful part of this message is when you give up the idea, when you just make peace with the idea, I really can't make my kid do this. I used to tell my own son when he was with ADHD that I said, I can't make you do this. All you have to do is flop to the floor, close your eyes. I'm not going to prop you up in the chair, and I couldn't make you do this. And then it was kind of talk about our relationship, and just you go along with me, I'll go along with you, kind of we work it out. But Ned and I use this consulting principle with our own kids, including our boys with ADHD, and it just works. And so that's the idea, as opposed to thinking that you're supposed to be managing and micromanaging, making sure that they're always doing what they're supposed to do. Our role, the role we suggest, is a consultant whose job it is to help where you can, to offer help and advice, and to help them solve a problem when they need it. But ultimately to help them figure out who they want to be, what kind of life, how to solve their own problems, so that they can when they leave home, they can run their own life.
And one of the ways that parents find themselves in the mixer, in addition to just, loving their kids and wanting them to do well and worried that they're going to fall behind or fall off the track, is that well-intended educators tell well-intended parents, listen, Seth, listen, Bill, listen, Ed, it's your job to make sure your kid gets his homework and comes to school prepared. Oh dear, oh dear. We're not big fans of tasking another human being with something that's impossible to do. Because just as Bill said, if a kid flops to the floor, if he chooses to stay up all night, if he chooses to throw all the workbooks out the window, like what are you going to do? And it puts parents in what Sapolsky would call the killer combination of stress, where you made someone feel responsible when they actually have a low sense of control. And so kind of organizing questions for parents to ask themselves. And at first these feel like, but really three questions. Whose problem is it? Whose responsibility is it? Whose life is it, right? So if your kid blows up a relationship with a friend, you think, oh my gosh, they're never going to have a friend like that again, or is failing all the class, think, oh my gosh, they're going to end up living in a van down by the river. Of course you're worried about this, but if I can't make my kid apologize or write the term paper, it can't possibly be my responsibility. It's also not my problem, and we're not saying it's your problem, buddy. We're not abandoning children, but respectfully. Seth, if you're 800 hours behind on homework, this really is your problem. It's not my problem. It's my obligation as a parent to offer help and offer support, but it really isn't my problem or my responsibility. And of course, most of all, it's not my life. It's your life and it's my kid's life. And our obligations as loving parents is to offer help and offer support, but not to take on ownership of what rightfully and appropriately belongs to someone else.
And that's part of also why I love your last book, is giving so many things to say at these times, because having because we have these defaults. That's the word I like to use. Like parents have all, and we all have, but we have these defaults for all these different situations. And we resort to the default until we don't, until we have another thing that we can start replacing the default. And that really provides people with that. So the last thing that I wanted to ask in terms of this particular section is this: when parents start hearing this or start diving in, do you get a lot of feedback that there's a sense of relief when they hear a different frame like this?
My experience, Seth, is that people initially, the idea that it's right for me not to be on my kid all the time, not to argue about the same thing over and over again, not to be worried about them all the time. It's very appealing. How do I do this? And implementing it at first is challenging, because it means that we have to zip our lip or sit on our hands and trust our kids more, and trust that they may screw stuff up. But that's what they need to do in order to really develop that self-driven quality. So yes, people are initially, when they read it, this makes so much sense. The science is so compelling. This sounds so great. It's not easy to do emotionally. So that's why we wrote this workbook, to help people kind of work through the challenges of doing that. Because sitting on your hands and zipping your lip is stressful, and it makes it. But once you get practice at it, it just makes parenting so much easier.
Well,
Once
I
you
wonder,
realize,
and specifically about that, the consultant frame, is that a relief for people to think, oh, I can think about this as, because I'd
yeah,
imagine a lot of,
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, because I mean, again, if that idea that if I'm responsible for something where I can't actually get it done, oh my gosh, it's so stressful. Where if you shift your thinking to it's my obligation to. So the three implications that we have of being a consultant is you offer help and you offer support. You don't ram it down kids' throats. And we do this in part because, hey, Seth, I got an idea on this. Can I run it by you? Or Matthew, I've been thinking about this and wondering, can I share where I'm coming with you from this? When we change that energy and it doesn't incite the stress response, kids are so much more open to saying, yeah, maybe that might work. The second one is we let kids make their own decisions because if you think about kids are trying to get homework done at the end of the year, right? You as a parent with probably a more organized bank, you think, well, if we do this and this and this and this and this, then we'll get the whole thing done. Your kid may have a completely different order on this, and mine might make more sense. But if I choose the process, the path, and the method, then of course the kid has a low sense of control and is going to fight on that. So we want kids to make their own decisions in part because they're much more likely to be motivated when they get to make a choice. And they're much more likely to own that decision and make it work, even if it's a suboptimal approach. And the third is we want kids to have the opportunity to fix their own mistakes. Young people, especially ones with ADHD, are more inclined probably to make mistakes than neurotypical folks are. And what happens is they make a mess and the parents jump in and clean up the mess. So kids can come away feeling, I'm a problem maker, someone else is the problem solver. And to go back to the point that Bill made a few minutes ago, we want kids to be able to learn to run their own life and develop the brains that can handle running their own lives. And one of the ways that you develop this emotional resilience and all those executive function skills, it's not in having things go perfectly. It's in seeing a problem, even one that you created, and feeling that I have some agency, I have some control, I know how to fix this. But changing this energy from commander in chief to supporter in chief, it really does kind of let me off the hook and gives kids the opportunity to own their own decisions and to own cleaning up their own mistakes.
I'll add to that. Certainly, many parents of kids with executive functioning difficulties say, "Well, he can't do it on his own. He needs this help."
Mm-hmm.
And I don't disagree. It's just that what we don't want, the reason we don't want to force help on kids that they're resisting, we don't want kids to spend a lot of energy resisting what's probably in their own best interest. And virtually everybody, eventually, when you take force off the table, when I'm trying to force you, kids say, I need help. And so the idea is, as Ned said, is to offer help, offer advice. I'll help you any way I can. If I can't help you, I'll try to find somebody who can. And because I want kids with executive function difficulties to have external scaffolding and supports, and if they need an executive coach, but I don't want that laid on them because I've seen kids who've worked with an executive coach for 2 years who's got nothing out of it. They resisted it constantly. And so one of the principles too, kind of a sub-principle of this idea of a consultant is not to work harder to help kids solve problems than they do. And because they think that somehow you're the source of solution to their problems.
Mm-hmm.
And with ADHD, we can offer incentives to kids in a way that's not controlling. And we're not opposed to incentives, but the language that we use to do it is saying, I know that you have executive function problems, that the part of your brain doesn't do this easily. And if you need a little extra motivation, I'm willing to offer you a little incentive here that if you think it would help you. So that I'm willing to do this for you as opposed to you need to do this and here's the consequences and here's the reward and consequences. Yeah. So we can use incentives that kids needed to jack up their dopamine in their brain so they can actually focus and get stuff done, which is what incentives ideally do, in a way that's not controlling. It doesn't feel like we're trying to say, you need to do this, I'm going to try to change you. So there's a lot.
If you do this, I'll give you $20 versus would it help you if, and it's just, and again, it's respectful rather than coercive. And that's so much of the energy that we're trying to change.
Yeah. And the last thing I'll say is that in the second book, Seth, as you know, in the chapter called The Language of a Parent Consultant, we talk about the language of getting buy-in, where we instead of just say, you need to do this or that, or well, why don't you do this? You say, I've got an idea about that. Can I run it by you? Or as Ned said, is there a way that I could help? And we talk about the language of no force. We say, no, clearly, I can't make you do this. I'm not trying to force you to do this. I respect you. If you don't really want to do this, okay, I can live with that. but I'm willing to help you. I'm willing to do anything I can to support you. And taking that view changes the energy in a way. The kids almost always, in my experience, step up to the plate. Accept help, they want help.
Let's let's shift gears here, and we're gonna pause this one, and then we're gonna start up in the other one in just a minute. Check it out.
Yeah.
We'll see. Thanks, guys. We'll see you in a second.